Welcome to the channel Mirelle Tales. Before we start, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Now, let's get into today's story.
Discarded to a nursing home and scorned as a cripple for a cheap secretary. Alara just sat silently in her wheelchair. But hold your breath. The moment the veto power was invoked, billions in assets were frozen, and her husband and mother-in-law were cast out as homeless vagrants, marking the most satisfying financial retribution of the year. For those who have subscribed, may your fortunes flourish. Amen. This is her story. My name is Alara Vance, and at 32 I was the principal architect and absolute majority shareholder of Vance Sterling Properties, a colossal real estate empire that shaped the skyline of New York City. I used to stand atop skyscrapers in my stilettos, gazing at the masterpieces of concrete and glass I had built from scratch with my own two hands. But now my reality has shrunk drastically to a cold metallic wheelchair confined within a luxury penthouse I ironically built and designed myself. This magnificent home has metamorphosed into a gilded cage, where I am exiled, regarded as little more than a broken piece of furniture waiting to be hauled to the storage unit. They, my husband and my mother-in-law, thought I was just a helpless cripple draped in a frumpy robe, a tiger who had lost her teeth, worthless in the eyes of the world. They forgot one fundamental thing. The muscles in my legs may be numb, but my brain remains a calculating machine that never sleeps. 8 months ago, my life was still running on a script I considered perfect. I had everything, including Adrian Sterling, my 4-year-old husband. In the eyes of the public and our business colleagues, Adrian was the epitome of masculine perfection, handsome, charismatic, eloquent, and holding the title of Chief Operating Officer at my company. But let me be honest tonight. That title was a mere formality, a pretense. I gave him the COO chair only to feed his male ego. Adrian was a status symbol in my social circle, an arm-candy husband who looked good in lifestyle magazine photos or at charity galas. In the stark reality of business, however, he was a bad investment with sharply declining returns. My fall quite literally happened on one fateful afternoon. We were inspecting the renovation of our vacation home in the Hamptons. Adrian, with his typical carelessness, too busy on the phone with God knows who, tripped over a stack of construction materials. He lost his balance and nearly tumbled from a second-floor balcony that hadn't yet been fitted with a protective railing. Without a second thought, my instincts took over. I lunged forward with all my strength, shoving his body onto the safe concrete area. But the momentum of that push sent my own body over the edge. My spine hit the rocky ground below with a cracking sound that will haunt me for the rest of my life. I consciously traded the function of my legs for his life. A sacrificial transaction that in my naivety I believed would bind his loyalty to me forever. But greedy men, it turns out, never understand the meaning of a debt of gratitude. In the first few months after I came out of the operating room, Adrian played the role of the martyred husband perfectly for the media and our friends. He pushed my wheelchair with a convincingly mournful expression. But behind the double doors of our master suite, the mask fell away instantly. The gaze that was once full of adoration slowly turned to one of disgust and revulsion. He began to avoid my touch, refused to sleep in the same bed, citing fear of hurting my fragile bones, and saw me as nothing more than a troublesome pile of disabled flesh. He used my paralysis as a moral license to abandon me. This humiliation was perfected by the presence of Rosalind, my 8-year-old mother-in-law. As soon as I came home from the hospital and was sentenced to a wheelchair, Adrian asked her to move in with us under the guise of caring for me. In reality, she arrived like a vulture to ensure her son's dominion over my fortune. Rosalind was a terrifying social chameleon. In front of her exclusive charity league, she was a graceful, pious, and empathetic maternal figure, always quoting wise proverbs about patience. But when the socialite guests went home and the front door was shut, her true, greedy, coarse, and materialistic nature clawed its way out. She was a woman from a modest background, now addicted to an upper-class lifestyle, all of it funded by the river of money flowing from my accounts. Alara, you need to face reality. Adrian is a normal, healthy man. He needs a whole wife, one who can serve him, not a broken ornament who just sits around in a faded robe every day, an eyesore, Rosalind hissed this morning. She said it while sipping her expensive chamomile tea in the dining room, looking down on me as I struggled to reach a jar of jam at the other end of the table. I remained silent. My trembling hand gripped a butter knife, but not to fight back or argue. I was archiving her every word in my cold, calculating mind. You're a burden, you know that. It's a pity my son has to sacrifice his youth, taking care of a cripple like you. If you had any self-respect, you'd just sign over all the company affairs and the deed to this penthouse to Adrian. After all, you're useless out there anymore, she added, in a commanding tone, deliberately flashing a new diamond bracelet on her wrist. Jewelry I knew was bought using the supplementary credit card I had given her son. The old woman thought the venom from her lips would shatter my spirit. She didn't realize that every poisonous sentence was slowly weaving the hangman's noose for her own neck. She was just a parasite feeding on the branch of my wealth, and a parasite that sucks too much blood will eventually burst. Then, as if this suffering wasn't complete enough, a third player entered my domestic hell. For the past few weeks, Adrian had been coming home later and later, using cliché excuses, a sudden board meeting, a tough client negotiation. As the principal architect and owner with unrestricted access to the master company calendar, I knew for a fact that there were no new projects requiring negotiations until 2 a.m. My suspicion wasn't the cheap paranoia of a blindly jealous cripple, but the result of precise sensory observation. 3 days ago, when Adrian tossed his suit jacket into the laundry hamper without so much as a greeting, my nose caught something completely out of place. The scent of Baccarat Rouge, a heavy, sweet and cloying perfume, a stark contrast to the masculine musk Adrian usually wore. It certainly wasn't my perfume. I had stopped touching a bottle of fragrance since my body became trapped on these steel wheels. Besides the scent trail, financial anomalies began to pop up like poisonous mushrooms after a rainstorm. Sitting in the dim corner of my room tonight, I opened my encrypted work tablet. I hacked into the mutation records of our joint account, which was supposed to be allocated only for our household operational costs. My emotionless eyes scanned the rows of digital numbers. There were cash withdrawals in the tens of thousands of dollars with no justification. There were bloated transactions at a prominent French designer boutique. There was a down payment to an independent real estate agency, specializing in elite apartment rentals in the heart of Soho. Someone was being secretly financed. Someone was being brutally spoiled using my sweat and blood. My memory immediately locked onto a specific name. Chloe Adrian's new, 5-year-old secretary. A young woman with a manipulative aura who always dressed a little too tightly at the office, smiled a little too widely at my husband when bringing him documents, and had a blind ambition that shone clearly in her eyes. Adrian had apparently brought a cheap mistress into our private financial circulation. He was using my fortune to buy the illusion of loyalty from another woman, while I, who willingly broke my spine to save his life, was left to rot alone in a corner of a room. Adrian, Rosalind, and that homewrecker were drunk on the delusion that they were freely moving pieces on a chessboard they completely controlled. They underestimated the woman in the wheelchair, foolishly believing that physical paralysis automatically meant financial, mental, and legal paralysis. They were gravely mistaken. I turned off my tablet with a soft tap. The bluish light vanished instantly, leaving the master bedroom in a cold, deep darkness. I stared straight through the solid oak door that separated me from the cheerful chatter of my husband and mother-in-law downstairs. Not a single tear was willing to fall tonight. The immense pain in my spine had evolved, mutating into a far more lethal energy, a calculation of vengeance as cold as ice and as systematic as an algorithm. Have fun while you can, Adrian. Enjoy every drop of my money, Rosalind. Party with your luxury bags, cheap mistress, I whispered into the silence of the room. My voice was steady, devoid of mercy. Because soon I will snatch everything from your hands, peel away your illusions until you beg to be returned to the wombs you came from. The wheels of my true revenge have just begun to turn. That afternoon, the Manhattan sky dripped an orange hue that reflected arrogantly on my Italian marble floors. I sat in silence in a corner of the living room, my metallic wheels gripping a Persian rug worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. The silence that was usually my companion was broken by the roar of Adrian's European sports car, a car whose title was stored safely in my personal vault. The main door opened and in walked my husband, not alone. Trailing behind him was a young woman with a rhythmic stride that radiated cheap arrogance. Chloe, his personal secretary from the office. Elara, Chloe will be staying here for a few days, Adrian announced without a hint of guilt, taking off his expensive jacket and handing it to a housekeeper who bowed her head. His eyes didn't even bother to look directly at me. There's a huge tender for the South Vance project next week. We need to work around the clock to revise the proposal. Instead of battling traffic back and forth to the office, it's more efficient if she stays in the downstairs guest room. A lie of pathetic imagination. As the mastermind behind Vance Sterling Properties, I knew perfectly well that the blueprints and proposal for the South Vance project had been finalized and digitally signed by me 3 weeks ago. There were no revisions, no sudden tenders. There was only a low-life husband who no longer had the decency to hide, bringing his mistress into my territory. Chloe smiled with a forced curve of her lips, an artificial smile better suited for a mannequin in a shop window. "I'm so sorry for the trouble, Miss Vance." "Mr. Sterling insisted I stay so we could get the work done faster." Besides, she added, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "Mr. Sterling needs help managing things around here, given your condition." Her words sounded sweet, but the poison was potent. She intentionally stressed the words, "your condition," while her eyes swept over the lower half of my body, slumped helplessly. My nose was instantly assaulted by the pungent aroma of Baccarat Rouge, the expensive perfume that had clung to Adrian's shirt a few nights ago. Now, the source of that scent stood before me, wearing a fashionable blazer and carrying a Hermes Birkin crocodile skin bag. My trained eyes instantly calculated the value attached to her body. Hermes bag $50,000. Christian Louboutin, shoes $1,200. Cartier watch on her left wrist $8,000. A total of nearly $60,000 clinging to a secretary whose monthly salary wouldn't even cover the sales tax on the sports car I bought for my husband. From the dining room, Rosalind appeared. Her wrinkled face, always sour when she saw me, suddenly lit up as if illuminated by a 1,000-watt bulb. She hurried towards Chloe, ignoring my presence as if I were a pile of dust in the corner. "Oh, Chloe, darling, you're finally here!" Rosalind shrieked in a nauseatingly high-pitched tone, hugging the young woman with a warmth she never once showed me, her legal daughter-in-law. "My, you look beautiful today. Is that a new bag? The color suits your skin perfectly." Adrian has such good taste when it comes to picking things out. Rosalind deliberately let her sentence hang, her eyes darting sharply towards me, still in my faded cotton robe. She scanned my appearance from head to toe with the same condescending gaze that had become my daily breakfast since I was diagnosed as paralyzed. "Look at yourself, Alara," my mother-in-law hissed, stepping closer until the scent of menthol rub and greed was palpable. "What kind of wife are you? Your husband comes home with an important guest from the office and you're just sitting there daydreaming in a shabby robe. No wonder Adrian is stressed at home. A house this grand needs a vibrant hostess, one who smells nice, who can serve her husband. Not a cripple who only makes trouble and burdens my son's mind." "Mom, that's enough. Don't waste your energy," Adrian chimed in casually. His hand lightly touched the small of Chloe's back, a possessive gesture far too intimate for a boss and his subordinate. Ilara gave up on her appearance after the accident. It's understandable, she has nothing to do all day but stare at the walls. They were digging their own graves with such enthusiasm. I didn't respond. No tears welled in my weary eyes. No lips trembled, holding back a sob. I simply looked at the three of them in turn, locking every gesture, every insult, and every condescending look into my mental database. They thought this silence and my shabby robe were symbols of absolute defeat. They thought the paralysis in my legs had spread to my sanity. They didn't know that a queen never screams when her kingdom is invaded by pests. A queen simply remains silent while she concocts a mass extermination poison. "Please enjoy the penthouse, Chloe." "Make yourself at home," I finally said. My voice was flat and as cold as ice without a hint of intonation. Chloe smiled triumphantly, feeling her provocation had successfully silenced me into submission. "Thank you so much, Miss Vance. I promise to take very good care of Mr. Sterling. I mean, Mr. Sterling's work." That night, the circus downstairs escalated. From behind my locked bedroom door, I switched on the massive monitor in my workspace, which was directly connected to the smart home security system. As the architect, I had installed dozens of microscopic invisible CCTV cameras in every public area of this penthouse, an absolute security standard for an asset worth tens of millions. On the high-resolution monitor, I watched the cheap mistress wander the living room in nothing but a thin silk nightgown, pouring my vintage wine into a crystal glass while Adrian hugged her neck from behind. On the sofa next to them, Rosalind was busy counting her gold jewelry, occasionally laughing at one of Chloe's crude jokes. A sickening harmony of parasites feasting in the golden cage that belonged to me. My fingers danced nimbly over my mechanical keyboard. I opened direct access to the main server of the bank, where I kept the bulk of my wealth portfolio. It was time for a thorough forensic audit of all supplementary credit cards and operational accounts I had entrusted to Adrian. Rows of red numbers appeared on my screen, indicating a flow of company funds disguised as client entertainment expenses, but which culminated in the purchase of a luxury rental property and branded goods in Chloe's name. "You're really enjoying my money," I whispered to their images on the monitor. A cynical smile slowly spread across my lips. "I'll let you feast greedily until you choke." 30 minutes passed in sharp silence. My eyes scrutinized every loophole of embezzlement Adrian had committed. He was cunning enough to forge some fake vendor receipts using a small shell company to funnel millions of dollars from project funds directly into his mistress's personal account. Unfortunately for him, Adrian's cleverness was that of an amateur playing in a predator's den. As the sole founder, I held control over the highest-level encryption keys. Every transaction, even those Adrian deleted from the front-end journal, was permanently recorded in my secret ledger. The evidence of this corporate crime was being downloaded and compiled into an encrypted folder I named Execution. Every expensive bag Chloe carried was not a gift of love from Adrian but legal proof of criminal embezzlement. Every arrogant smile on my mother-in-law's face, funded by my credit card, was her VIP ticket to permanent social ruin. I wasn't just going to kick them out of this house. That was too easy and not painful enough. I would seize back every asset they ever bought using my name. I would let them feel on top of the world for a few more days. I would let Adrian feel like an untouchable COO, let Rosalind feel like a respected matriarch, and let Chloe feel like she had won the life lottery from a disabled woman. The higher they climbed the pillar of their arrogance, the more lethal the impact of the gravity I would forcibly pull from beneath their feet. You think the woman in the wheelchair is paralyzed and helpless? Not at all. I am simply sitting comfortably, laying brick by brick, to build your new future. A prison of poverty. The game has just been leveled up, and my plan of revenge has begun completely unbeknownst to them. At 2 a.m., the nocturnal silence of my golden palace was dense, broken only by faint, nauseating sounds from the guest room downstairs. The sound of soft laughter, a creaking bed, and deliberately unsubdued moans penetrated the marble floor of my room. Adrian and Chloe were celebrating their fictitious overtime. In this cold, isolated master suite, I sat frozen in my wheelchair, illuminated by the blue glow of 3 high-resolution monitors surrounding my workstation. Tonight, while my husband planted seeds of betrayal in a bed within my own home, I was planting the seeds of his destruction on my mechanical keyboard. They were drunk on cheap lust, assuming the rightful owner of this home was fast asleep, silently mourning her paralysis. My fingers moved nimbly, dancing across the keys, entering a series of god-level access codes Adrian never knew existed. He may have been the COO, thanks to my pity, but he was completely blind to the digital architecture of the company I built from the ground up. I was the true creator behind this empire. On the central monitor, the financial dashboard of Vance Sterling Properties was wide open, completely exposed under my sharp supervision. A silent but deadly late-night forensic audit officially began at that very moment. I secretly pulled mutation data from the last 6 months, meticulously tracking every outflow authorized by Adrian's forged digital signature. What I found was not just a cheap affair, but massive systematic financial crime. My eyes narrowed as I saw a strange transaction under Southern Project land acquisition costs. The figure was staggering, $1.5 million. Yet there were no legal land documents, no deeds of sale, no notary details attached on the main server. With a few lines of complex query commands, I broke through their cheap encryption and traced the destination account number. The account didn't belong to any property vendor. It belonged to a fictitious shell company established just 3 months ago in the name of Chloe Sanders. That bastard. My husband had the gall to steal money from the wife whose legs were paralyzed from saving his life just to buy a luxury loft in Soho for a cheap mistress who constantly demeaned me in my own home. The vile theft continued to stain my data screen like a disgusting virus. Regular monthly expenses of tens of thousands camouflaged as VIP client entertainment all ended up at high-end designer boutiques and exclusive beauty salons. My husband was truly treating my fortune like a bottomless wishing well, funding his mistress's socialite lifestyle without a shred of shame, while I was forced by his mother to feel worthless in a faded robe considered a troublesome burden. Adrian really thought he was a smart man. He thought that by deleting transaction logs on his office computer and manipulating monthly financial reports, the trail of his theft would vanish. He forgot one fatal thing: the company's cloud backup system was always connected in real time to my multi-layered encrypted personal server in this dark room. Every dollar he stole, every fake vendor receipt he created had been fully downloaded into a folder that would soon become his career's coffin. The total company loss due to this leech of a COO reached $4.2 million, a sum more than sufficient to drag him behind bars on charges of embezzlement. Switching to the left monitor, I opened the personal investment portfolio data file that had been funding Rosalind. The old woman who loved to spew insults at me was apparently unaware that all her mutual funds and high-yield deposits were fully tied to a secret master account belonging to me. The fantastic monthly allowance she used to buy gold jewelry and flaunt her wealth came purely from stock dividends whose keys I held tightly. My mother-in-law was, in essence, a disgusting parasite living on a branch of my wealth. And tomorrow morning, I would begin to slowly cut off her supply of luxurious oxygen until she suffocated in absolute poverty. I slowly turned my wheelchair to face my own reflection in the large fogged glass window. The woman in the mirror no longer had a single tear to shed. This paralysis was once the source of my deepest depression, physical proof of my blind love for a low-life man. But tonight, this wheelchair had transformed into my impenetrable shield. They were too busy underestimating me, because my legs couldn't move forward without realizing that my hands were weaving a deadly steel snare right around their necks. "You think you are the winners in this disgusting charade," I whispered to my reflection, which now looked as cold as a block of marble. My decision was final and absolute. Adrian wasn't just a cheating husband. He was a toxic asset in the corporate structure that needed to be liquidated immediately. I would never stoop to confronting him with hysterical screams like a foolish wife in a soap opera. The most fitting punishment for a narcissistic glory-seeking man is not a tear-filled divorce, but the brutal and permanent revocation of his identity, his pride, and all his financial access. I would drain the life out of him. I firmly pressed Save As on the compiled forensic audit document. That sacred file was immediately sent via an encrypted communication channel to Arthur Cromwell, my senior corporate lawyer and the most ruthless executor I trusted. He was a cold-blooded legal wolf who had never once failed to tear his prey apart in the courtroom. My message was brief, concise, yet filled with absolute execution instructions. "Mr. Cromwell, review this evidence file immediately. Prepare a draft for a civil lawsuit to claim maximum damages for all misappropriated funds. Prepare a notice of termination with cause for Adrian without a single cent of severance and issue a block on all his credit card facilities. We will soon conduct a massive asset liquidation to seize everything purchased in the name of the trollop named Chloe Sanders. Await my signal. Send." A double gray checkmark appeared at the edge of my screen. The cold-blooded killing machine had been officially activated tonight. From downstairs, Chloe's shrill laughter echoed faintly, followed by Adrian's low growl. They were preparing to fall into a deep sleep, resting on a pile of time bombs I had just set. Adrian had no idea that in a matter of days, he would be nothing but a destitute pariah, shunned by everyone. The arrogant Rosalind would lose her false throne and crawl as a social outcast. And Chloe, the cheap mistress, would be forced to realize the hard way that the Hermes bag she flaunted was actually a one-way ticket to permanent financial ruin. A true ruler's war begins in total silence, drawn through rows of numbers on a monitor, and executed by a deadly digital signature. I, Ilara Vance, may be physically trapped in this steel wheelchair, but I will ensure the three of them soon kneel at my wheels, whimpering for mercy. Tonight is the last night they will sleep soundly and dream beautiful dreams. Karma doesn't need to be waited for. I myself will deliver that torment to their bedroom door with the most elegant smile. This morning my golden palace could finally breathe free from the pollution of betrayal. At 8:00 a.m. sharp, Adrian and Chloe departed in his European sports car, a car that would soon be just a bitter memory. They left under the pretense of a marathon meeting with investors, a cheap code for an all-day date at a five-star hotel. Not long after, Rosalind, the parasite, disguised as a pious mother-in-law, also glided out. She was picked up by my personal driver to attend a diamond-studded luncheon with her socialite circle. Before stepping out the door, the old woman made a point to glance at me, sitting silently in my wheelchair in the living room. She snorted, looking with disgust at the worn-out robe I deliberately wore, then muttered about how embarrassing it was to have a disabled daughter-in-law who couldn't take care of herself. I simply returned her sneer with a faint smile that didn't reach my eyes. Let her enjoy today. Let her flaunt the jewelry bought with my lifeblood. Today was the last day she would breathe the air of luxury. At exactly 10:00 a.m., the door of the private garage elevator hidden behind a wooden panel in my personal library opened silently. I had reprogrammed its access last night. It now recognized only my fingerprint and retinal scan. From behind the steel door stepped two men in crisp suits carrying titanium briefcases. The first was Arthur Cromwell, my senior corporate lawyer and trusted legal executioner. Behind him was Mr. Hayes, an elite notary whose credibility was unquestioned among the city's billionaires. Good morning, Miss Vance. We've confirmed the cybersecurity is clean. There are no listening devices in this room, Mr. Cromwell greeted me, his deep voice calming. He bowed respectfully before me, as if I were still standing proudly at the boardroom podium, not sitting in a wheelchair. Let's skip the pleasantries, Arthur. We only have 6 hours before the parasites return demanding to be fed, I replied coldly. I pressed a button on my wheelchair's armrest, moving it closer to the massive marble work table in the center of the room. "Where are the documents?" Mr. Hayes placed a thick stack of documents stamped in red on the table. Here, the masterpiece of my revenge began to be built brick by brick. This wasn't about confronting a cheap mistress with tears and hair-pulling. This was the elegant architecture of financial ruin, an invisible wall that would slowly choke them until they ran out of breath. As per your instructions last night, Miss Vance Arthur began opening the first page, filled with rows of numbers and legal clauses. We have prepared the legal instruments to liquidate assets silently. All non-essential properties, the undeveloped land in the south, and the liquid stocks you had registered under the joint account with Mr. Sterling are now in the process of being transferred to a new offshore trust entirely under your sole control. I studied the numbers carefully. $15 million. That was the total combined portfolio that had long been Adrian's shield of arrogance. He felt entitled to half of it just because his name was printed on a marriage certificate. Now, his name on that paper was worth less than used toilet paper. Good. What about the liabilities and debts of the shell company Adrian used to steal my money? I asked sharply, turning the page. This is the most interesting part, ma'am, Mr. Hayes chimed in, with the thin smile of a cold-blooded professional. We've structured a contract restructuring. As COO, Mr. Sterling had the authority to sign credit agreements. We have engineered it so that the entire debt burden from the shell company in Chloe Sanders's name is converted into a personal loan in Mr. Sterling's name using his phantom shares as initial collateral. The moment you use your veto power to fire him, those shares become void. All these toxic assets will explode directly in his lap. I laughed without a sound, a laugh that froze the air around us. Adrian had no idea that his digital signature, which he had carelessly applied to approve a fictitious project last week, had now been rerouted by my trusted IT team into a notarized promissory note. He had just dug his own financial grave. And the main time bomb, my eyes fixed on Arthur. "It's set and ticking, ma'am," he replied, pulling out one last document, a banking agreement. The auto-debit system for all primary and supplementary credit card facilities held by Mr. Sterling and Rosalind has been manipulated. Until now, their bills were automatically paid from your operational account. Starting at midnight tonight, that payment system will be severed and redirected to Mr. Sterling's personal salary account, whose balance we have already locked. This was the checkmate I loved most. As soon as Adrian and his mistress tried to swipe those cards tomorrow, or the day after, the debt would swell with suffocating daily penalty interest. They wouldn't realize it until a civil lawsuit valued at 5 times the amount of their theft arrived at their doorstep. As my nimble fingers affixed my signature in gold ink on dozens of legal documents, my work tablet suddenly lit up. A credit card transaction notification appeared in bold letters: "Transaction successful, $45,000 at Cartier 5th Avenue. My husband had just bought a luxury piece of jewelry for his whore in broad daylight, using a card he thought was still connected to my lifeline. I glanced at the notification, then at the debt restructuring document under my hand. "Buy whatever you want, Adrian," I whispered softly. A sentence as smooth as a cobra's venom. "Enjoy the false capital gains from your stupidity, because every dollar you swipe today, you will pay back with the dirty sweat of a manual laborer tomorrow." Mr. Cromwell packed the signed documents back into the titanium briefcase. Everything was locked in. A steel chain was now wrapped around their necks, and the end of that chain was in my hand. "Everything is now legally binding, Miss Vance. When would you like us to dispatch the security team and the official termination letter?" Arthur asked. "Wait for this weekend," I replied, turning my wheelchair toward the large window overlooking the main gate. "Adrian is planning a lavish birthday party for his mistress in this penthouse. He plans to lock me in my room so I don't spoil the view. I want to destroy them at the very moment they feel most powerful in front of all the colleagues they've been lying to." "As you command, ma'am." The two men bowed respectfully and disappeared back through the secret door, descending into the earth. The room fell silent again. I looked down at my motionless legs, but in my mind I was already running 1,000 miles ahead of them. Adrian and Rosalind would come home tonight with arrogant smiles, demanding dinner and service. They had no idea they had just been demoted from homeowners to future tenants of a dilapidated shack on the outskirts of the city. The invisible walls were complete, and they had unknowingly locked themselves inside with a smiling predator. This weekend, my golden palace was officially hijacked and turned into a cheap stage play. Since 6 a.m., the tranquility of my home had been shattered by the clamor of dozens of workers from an elite event organizer. They were busy setting up a transparent marquee in the back garden, arranging thousands of imported white lilies flown in directly from Holland, and setting up banquet tables draped in silk. Today was the parasite's coronation day. Adrian was proudly hosting a 26th birthday party for Chloe, disguised as a corporate networking event right on the land whose deed was purely in my name. Towards the afternoon, as I was staring blankly at the garden from my second-floor bedroom window, the door was thrown open without a knock. Adrian strode in. He was wearing a $5,000 Tom Ford silk tuxedo, the bill for which of course went to my corporate credit card. His face was polished with an arrogance so thick I could almost smell his stupidity from 6 feet away. "Listen, Alara," Adrian said sharply, his eyes flashing with an unconcealed hostility. "Tonight, many business colleagues and executives from partner companies will be here. Chloe has arranged everything perfectly." He paused, glancing with disgust at the drab gray robe I deliberately wore to emphasize my role as a helpless cripple. "I don't want you coming downstairs and ruining the scenery," he continued without a shred of pity in his voice. "The presence of a depressed wheelchair-bound cripple will only make my guests uncomfortable. You stay here. The maid will bring your dinner later. Don't you dare show your face outside this room." Click. He didn't just forbid me from leaving. The coward locked my bedroom door from the outside. The sound of the key turning in the lock echoed softly, a stark symbol of how fully he believed he controlled my life and my fortune. He was caging the queen in her own castle to make way for a whore to sit on the throne. I stared at the now locked oak door. No anger erupted in my chest. No fist pounded the wheel of my chair in frustration. There was only an asymmetrical smile curving slowly and coldly on my lips. Adrian thought he was locking me in darkness to keep me from reality. In fact, he had just given me a VIP ticket to the main control room with zero risk of interruption. I turned my wheelchair away from the door toward the secret workstation in the corner. With a single swipe on the fingerprint scanner beneath the desk, 3 giant monitors before me lit up simultaneously. High-resolution CCTV camera feeds hidden behind crystal chandeliers, ceiling corners, and marble pillars now displayed a real-time visual of the entire party area with absolute clarity. At 7 p.m., the circus began. On the center screen, I watched Chloe descend the spiral staircase like a pop-up prima donna. A haute couture evening gown studded with Swarovski crystals clung tightly to her curves. She linked arms with my husband, a sickeningly triumphant smile on her face as they greeted the arriving guests. In another corner of the screen, Rosalind stood near the buffet table, busily showing off her diamond necklace to the wives of Adrian's colleagues. My mother-in-law was truly relishing her role as the grand dame, a parasite, endlessly sucking nutrients while spitting on the very plate that fed her. My hands began to dance across the keyboard. The right-hand screen now displayed the corporate banking dashboard, linked directly to a real-time notification system. I wasn't just watching a party. I was conducting a live forensic audit with godlike precision. Every time the black card in my name was swiped downstairs on a portable machine, a row of numbers on my screen turned bright red. I calculated every fake laugh, every clink of a baccarat crystal glass, and every bite of expensive food that entered the mouths of the parasites below. 3 bottles of vintage Dom Perignon were opened. A $3,000 charge hit the Public Relations Division's credit card. A 5 Wagyu and Beluga caviar were served. A $15,000 charge was debited under the fictitious description VIP client dinner. Then came the peak of this nauseating comedy. Adrian took the microphone and stood in the middle of the room, wrapping his arm around the cheap mistress's waist with a look of misplaced adoration and pride. "Good evening, everyone," Adrian's voice echoed through my monitor's speakers. "Tonight is not just a birthday celebration for Chloe, my secretary and extraordinary right hand. It's also a celebration of her tireless dedication in helping me steer Vance Sterling Properties toward a brighter future." The guests applauded enthusiastically. Rosalind cheered the loudest, oblivious to how shameful the scene of an affair wrapped in a ribbon of professionalism was in public. A brighter future. Nonsense. Adrian was celebrating his own destruction on the altar of his greed. He was using my company's money to fund this party, thinking the financial system was still under his control. He didn't know that the civil lawsuit prepared by Arthur Cromwell was growing thicker and deadlier. Every dollar he swiped tonight would be classified as corporate embezzlement, a financial burden that would turn into a toxic asset the moment I snuffed out his career tomorrow morning. While watching the monitor, I opened the finalized termination draft. Tomorrow was the emergency general meeting I had arranged secretly through my legal proxy. Adrian would be summoned before the board, and I from behind the scenes would scorch the earth using my absolute veto power. On the CCTV, the party wore on. Chloe cut a 5-tiered birthday cake adorned with edible gold leaf. Adrian kissed her lips in front of everyone, a scene that would make a normal woman break down in hysterics. But for me, the executioner in the shadows that scene was just more material to strengthen my legal case. Enjoy that golden cake, Adrian. Swallow every last drop of that expensive champagne. Dance with your stolen jewelry, Chloe. Fawn over your son, Rosalind. Because exactly at midnight, when the auto-debit on your cards is cut off, and Adrian's name is permanently submitted to every credit blacklist, you will finally realize the truth. You are just a group of vagrants squatting in the territory of a bloodthirsty predator. The rest of this night is expensive borrowed time. When the sun rises and your hangover fades, I will make sure you wake up to the smell of the sewer, which will become your permanent perfume in a dilapidated shack. Those who thought they had discarded me like a piece of history will soon be burned to ashes. I leaned my stiff back against the wheelchair's cushion, rubbing my knees that could no longer feel a thing. The pain of past sacrifice had been completely replaced by a cold, simmering passion for revenge coursing through my veins. Smiling with satisfaction in the darkness that had become my faithful companion, I knew their act was almost over. The steel trap had snapped shut, leaving no escape. The pre-dawn light crept in, slowly carrying the lingering scent of alcohol, sweat, and debauchery from downstairs, seeping through the crack under my door. The mistress's birthday party was over, leaving a pile of visual and moral trash in my golden palace. Downstairs, the parasites were surely still sound asleep, lulled by illusions of power and the hangover from champagne they'd chugged like water. But in this master suite, kept at a cool 60 degrees Fahrenheit, I hadn't slept a second. My eyes were fixed on the 3 monitors glowing blue, reflecting the lines of code and legal drafts that would be my husband's death warrant. Today was the day of a crucial phase of the financial execution, transferring all toxic assets and shell company liabilities directly into the lap of Adrian Sterling. As a COO who spent more time in his mistress's bed than in the meeting room, Adrian had a fatal weakness that was incredibly easy to exploit. He was too lazy to read legal documents. He only loved the thrill of affixing his digital signature and passcode to feel powerful. That stupidity and arrogance was the biggest security breach in corporate history, and I would exploit it to the very last drop. Through an encrypted channel, I had coordinated with Arthur Cromwell and a special IT team whose loyalty was to me alone. We orchestrated a masterpiece of cyber manipulation. On my monitor, I tracked a pop-up board approval system disguised to look completely routine. I titled the document Q3 Vendor Clearing and PR Budget Restructuring, a title so boring yet official-sounding to an amateur executive. In reality, hidden behind the mundane interface were hundreds of pages of debt transfer clauses. The document detailed that all tax debts from 3 stalled projects, the mortgage payments for Chloe's luxury loft, and the invoices from the fictitious vendors Adrian used to embezzle my money, were legally converted into a personal loan secured against all of his phantom shares. Furthermore, the document contained a digitally notarized admission of debt for $15.5 million. At exactly 11:00 a.m., my door was knocked on rudely. Without waiting for a response, Adrian strode in. He was wearing only silk pajama pants, his hair a mess, and his eyes bloodshot. He looked disheveled, but his arrogance stood tall like a fragile, crumbling tower. "You haven't showered, Alara?" he asked condescendingly, glancing with disgust at the faded robe still wrapped around me. "This room smells like a hospital ward. You're really killing my morning mood." I slowly turned my wheelchair to face him, suppressing a surge of rage and replacing it with a flat, empty expression. "What do you want, Adrian? You already locked me up all night so your whore could party." Adrian snorted contemptuously, walking to the vanity to retrieve his work tablet. "I didn't come here to argue with a depressed woman. I need to approve some fund releases for last night's party and this quarter's budget. You know this company doesn't run without my approval as COO. And Chloe needs additional funds to pay the decorator." The man stood just a few feet from me. His arrogant fingers tapped the tablet screen. On my central system, I could see a notification that he had just opened the trap document I sent to his private dashboard 10 minutes ago. "This is the vendor budget restructuring doc, right? Why are the attachments so thick?" Adrian mumbled, frowning at his tablet. My heart beat with a calculated rhythm. This was the critical point. If he read page 3, he would see the debtor's name change, from Vance Sterling Properties to his own. "It's just the standard summary from the finance team," I replied, my voice deliberately weak and tired, playing the helpless wife to perfection. "Read it if you want to waste 2 hours. Or you can just sign it so the funds get released before the banks close at 3 p.m. Your call, Mr. COO." The words Mr. COO and the threat of the bank closing worked like magic on his ego. Adrian laughed dismissively. His index finger immediately swiped to the very last page, not bothering to read a single line of the legal text. He hated complicated work. He only loved instant money. "I don't have time for these cheap technical details." That's why I hire people, he said arrogantly. With one swift motion, Adrian pressed his thumb on the tablet's biometric scanner and entered his 6-digit PIN. Beep. On my hidden monitor, a green dialog box lit up legal document ratified. Liability transfer complete. Portfolio access key activated. A sensation of ice-cold victory coursed through my disabled spine. I bowed my head slightly, hiding the deadly smirk I could barely contain. My husband had just signed his own financial death warrant. As of this second, Adrian Sterling officially had a personal debt of over $15 million to my company. Simultaneously, that digital signature triggered an automatic security protocol that blocked his access to all investment portfolios and the main corporate treasury. He was now just a powerless executive with a debt load equivalent to the lifetime earnings of 100 construction workers. All those liabilities were now his sole legal responsibility. If he couldn't pay, the court would seize everything he ever thought he owned, put his name on every credit blacklist, and throw him onto the street. Done, Adrian said, tossing the tablet back on the table. He looked at me with an illusory look of triumph. Thanks to me, this company keeps breathing. Stop pitying yourself with that blank stare, Alara. You're just lucky I'm still willing to manage the rest of your life in this house. He turned and walked to the door. Before leaving, he glanced back one last time. And, please don't cause any trouble today. Mom has a headache, and Chloe needs to rest after handling my important guests last night. We don't need any disturbances from a piece of history that can only sit still. The door closed again. I lifted my face, letting the devilish smile I had been suppressing finally bloom completely. Sleep well, Mr. Sterling. Enjoy your dream today, I whispered to the empty room. In 24 hours, the civil lawsuit will be officially filed. The termination letter executed with my absolute veto power is already printed and sitting on Arthur Cromwell's desk. When they wake up tomorrow, their credit cards will be declined because I've killed the auto-debit system, and his mistress's Hermes bags will be seized as evidence of criminal embezzlement. Those who always looked down on me for my physical paralysis failed to realize that I had just broken their financial backbone. Soon they will have no shelter but a dilapidated shack with the pungent smell of a sewer. The parasite and the cheap mistress will soon learn what it feels like to be a squatter in the harshness of reality. The plan to seize the toxic assets has succeeded flawlessly. Now the stage for brutal asset liquidation and eviction is fully set. The storm of destruction is no longer on the horizon. It is right at their door. This morning, the air in my main living room felt much thicker, more suffocating. Sunlight mercilessly illuminated the cold Italian marble floor. I sat frozen in my wheelchair, deliberately wrapped in a faded, frumpy robe. This pathetic appearance was the final illusion I let them savor. Across the thick glass table, 3 traders stood with postures of fictitious victory. Adrian stood tall in the center in his expensive suit, his arm tightly around Chloe's waist, the cheap mistress displaying a condescending smile. To their left, Rosalind stood arrogantly stroking her pearl necklace, as if she were the absolute matriarch of this palace. Adrian stepped forward, tossing a thick manila envelope directly onto my lap. The sound of paper hitting my numb thighs broke the silence sharply. Sign it. On the notarized line, he commanded arrogantly. It's the divorce papers. My lawyer has handled everything. I've already arranged a room for you at a private care facility on the outskirts of the city. The car comes for you this afternoon. Just bring your clothes. Because this penthouse and all company assets automatically fall to me as fair compensation for the time I've wasted taking care of a cripple like you. Rosalind snorted cynically, driving the final nail in. Face it, Alara. A physically disabled woman is nothing more than a piece of history. You should be grateful my son isn't just throwing you out on the street. All this time you've acted like this home was yours, but you were just a parasite living off Adrian's success. Let my son be happy, with Chloe, who is whole. Chloe smiled with sickeningly false sympathy. Miss Vance, don't worry. I promise to take good care of Adrian. You just focus on your therapy at the facility. I looked down at the worthless divorce draft. No tears, no trembling lips. The air suddenly dropped several degrees as I slowly lifted my face. I wasn't angry. I was thoroughly amused by their irredeemable stupidity. An asymmetrical smile, cold, measured, and deadly spread across my lips. That ice-cold smile made the triumphant laughter on Adrian's face fade, replaced by a frown of confusion. A care facility. Compensation of company assets. My voice slid out quiet, flat, but sharp as a surgical scalpel. I tore the manila envelope into two asymmetrical pieces, then tossed the scraps onto the marble floor like worthless trash. You're a truly pathetic clown, Adrian. You were so busy playing house with this prostitute that you forgot who built the stage you're standing on. What the hell, Alara? Don't test me, Adrian barked, his face flushing red as his male ego was slapped. I pressed a hidden intercom button under my wheelchair's armrest. 3 seconds later, the main door swung open. 6 burly men in black tactical security uniforms marched in with precision, securing the perimeter of the living room. Behind them strode Arthur Cromwell, my most brutal legal executioner, radiating an aura of absolute authority. He carried the titanium briefcase containing our financial nuclear warhead, ready to be detonated. "Good morning, Miss Vance. All protocols are 100% activated," Arthur reported in his baritone voice, bowing respectfully to me before staring sharply at the 3 parasites now frozen in confusion at the sudden invasion. "Who are these people? How dare they barge into my house without permission?" "I am the Chief Operating Officer," Adrian yelled, trying desperately to maintain his fictitious authority. "Former Chief Operating Officer," I corrected with lethal intonation. I leaned forward, looking straight through Adrian's pupils, which now radiated pure terror. "Let's clarify a fundamental fact that your tiny brain has failed to grasp. I am not just your wife in a wheelchair. I am the majority shareholder with 70% absolute ownership of Vance Sterling Properties. You are just a puppet I gave a title to so you wouldn't feel so insecure." Arthur Cromwell stepped forward, shoving a red-stamped document into Adrian's chest. "Mr. Adrian Sterling, this is the official copy of the resolution from this morning's emergency general meeting. Miss, Vance has exercised her absolute veto power to terminate you for cause effective immediately. On charges of corporate embezzlement, you are fired without a single cent of severance." "Embezzlement? I didn't embezzle anything. These assets are joint property," Adrian shrieked, his voice trembling. Rosalind turned pale while Chloe took 2 steps back, her instincts sensing danger. I let out a cynical laugh that echoed eerily through the room. "You forgot about the late-night forensic audit I conducted on the main server. I have a record of every dollar you stole to buy luxury bags, cars, and an apartment for your whore. The total company loss is $4.2 million. And the most brilliant part. Remember that long document you signed yesterday afternoon without reading it?" Adrian gasped. His breath caught as if an iron hand was choking him. "That wasn't a vendor approval document. It was a document transferring all your toxic assets and shell company liabilities. With your own digital signature, you personally assumed that debt burden," I explained with immense satisfaction. "You now officially have a personal debt of $15.5 million to me, a massive sum awaiting forced execution through a civil lawsuit that was filed with the court 1 hour ago." "Impossible. You're lying. This is my son's hard-earned money," Rosalind shrieked hysterically, fumbling in her purse to call her private bank manager. Adrian frantically opened his mobile banking app with trembling fingers. "Go ahead, check your balances," I challenged, unblinking. The asset liquidation and portfolio transfer was completed at midnight. The auto-debit system for all supplementary credit cards that pampered you has been permanently shut down. Your salary account is completely frozen. Your name, Adrian, is being processed for permanent inclusion on every credit blacklist for life. You have nothing left in this world but the clothes on your backs." Adrian stared at his phone screen, his eyes wide. "Access denied. Zero balance." His entire world, his illusion of power and the peak of his arrogance collapsed in a matter of seconds, shattering into a million pieces on the marble floor beneath my paralyzed legs. His handsome face turned ashen. He was no longer the untouchable, arrogant COO. He was just a future destitute choked by tens of millions in debt. I leaned back in my wheelchair, looking down on them from my invisible throne. This penthouse, this company, and even every particle of air you breathe in this room is purely mine. You thought you'd successfully discarded a crippled woman. No. You just detonated a grenade in your own hands. You will spend the rest of your lives as vagrants in a dilapidated shack with the smell of a sewer. This play is over. Please get off my property. Now. The living room of my golden palace had now transformed into an execution chamber as cold as a morgue. The air felt thin, sucked out by the absolute panic radiating from the pale faces of the 3 traitors before me. The illusion of greatness Adrian had built collapsed instantly, crushing his ego into dust. The man who 10 minutes ago was arrogantly serving me fraudulent divorce papers now looked like a lost little boy. I remained calm in my wheelchair, letting this frumpy robe bear silent witness to my victory. My physical posture might be helpless, but my gaze was that of a tyrant who had just passed a death sentence. "You're insane, Alara. You can't do this. I'm your husband. Under marital law, I'm entitled to half of the capital gains and all assets acquired during our marriage, Adrian screamed, his voice breaking. The veins in his neck bulged a mixture of rage and terror. He was still trying to hide behind a legal shield he didn't understand. I laughed softly, a laugh that sliced through the remnants of his pride. Marital law. How interesting that you bring up the law. Mr. Former COO. Unfortunately, you were too busy sleeping with your secretary to ever read the prenuptial agreement you signed 7 years ago. Our prenup dictates an absolute separation of assets. There is no marital property. Everything reverts to its original entity. And that original entity is Vance Sterling Properties. You have absolutely no portfolio in this house. Arthur Cromwell, the legal executioner, standing tall beside me like the angel of death, stepped forward. In accordance with the veto power executed by Miss Vance Mr. Sterling, you are now classified as an external party committing private property violation trespassing. Security strip him of all company facilities. The 6 burly men moved with military efficiency. 2 immediately grabbed Adrian's arms as he tried to resist. Another snatched the latest smartphone from his hand, an office-issued phone he had used to send lewd texts to his mistress. In another corner, Chloe, the cheap mistress, began to realize the cruise ship she was on was sinking fast. She slowly backed toward the door, trying to slip out while clutching her crocodile skin, Hermes Birkin bag as if it were her lifeline. Detain that woman, I ordered coldly. 2 guards immediately blocked Chloe's path. The young woman let out a choked scream as one of the guards forcibly ripped the expensive bag from her grasp. What are you doing? This is my bag. Adrian bought it for me, Chloe shrieked hysterically, crocodile tears starting to ruin her expensive makeup. That is not your bag, Miss Sanders. Arthur cut in, his baritone voice booming. Based on last night's forensic audit, the bag was purchased using funds from the land acquisition budget. It is a toxic asset, the proceeds of corporate money laundering. That bag, along with the diamonds around your neck and the watch on your wrist, are being seized as evidence to support our civil lawsuit. You are only permitted to leave this property with the clothes on your back. Chloe collapsed onto the marble floor sobbing as she realized her instant wealth had just vanished into thin air. She looked at Adrian with pleading eyes, but he was too busy struggling against the security guards. Adrian didn't spare her a single glance. Their cheap love evaporated instantly when faced with the terror of poverty. Rosalind, the arrogant mother-in-law, was not spared from the storm. She had been frantically tapping her phone trying to contact her private bank manager. Hello, why is my platinum card blocked? I want to make a cash withdrawal now. What do you mean my balance is insufficient? It's useless, Rosalind, I said, casually enjoying the spectacle of the old woman's desperation. I've cut the auto-debit system that has been pampering you. You thought you were a grand dame, but you were just a parasite constantly feeding on the sweat of a woman you insulted as a cripple. All your facilities have been revoked. Soon, the mountain of credit card debt you've accumulated will chase you to your grave. Elara, please, honey. Rosalind's tone suddenly shifted 180 degrees, turning pathetic. I'm your mother. You can't just throw me out. Where will I live? Anywhere you want, as long as it's not on my land, I hissed, her pleading face making me even more disgusted. You are parasites who have sucked enough blood. Now, pay the bill. Adrian suddenly reached into his pocket, roughly pulling out the keys to his European sports car and throwing them at my feet. The keys clattered against the metallic wheel of my chair. Take the damn car. I don't need your pity. I have my own savings. I'll get back on my feet and destroy you, Elara. That damn car was never yours, Adrian. It's leased in the company's name. And the repossession team is waiting at the gate to collect it. I shot back sharply, destroying his last illusion of resistance. And about those savings, our legal team filed for a full account freeze with the central bank this afternoon per a court order for suspicion of corporate embezzlement. Your name is already blacklisted, Adrian. A credit blacklist so severe you won't even be able to get a loan for a used moped. Adrian's eyes went vacant. Madness and terror mingled on his face, which now looked 10 years older. The asset liquidation plan I had designed overnight had worked with surgical precision, severing all his financial arteries without mercy. Get them out of here now, my final decree came. Don't let them take a single thing from this house. They are pieces of history that must be swept from my sight. The security guards unhesitatingly dragged the 3 pathetic humans toward the main door. Adrian struggled and swore violently. Rosalind wailed, mourning her fate, and Chloe could only walk limply, sobbing with shame at having to leave without a single one of her luxury items. I moved my wheelchair toward the large glass door overlooking the front entrance. From behind the cool tinted glass, I witnessed the most beautiful sight of my life. The former director, the socialite mother-in-law, and the fashionable mistress were roughly shoved until they stumbled onto the hot asphalt outside the iron gates of my palace. "Welcome to reality, Adrian," I murmured to the glass fogged by my breath. "Enjoy your journey to the first dilapidated shack you can find. Get your noses used to the smell of the sewer because the stench of poverty will be the only luxury perfume you can afford from this day forward. And believe me, you will never see me stop this torment. You have just become homeless, and I am the architect of your hell." The downfall of the director's illusion was complete. Now, the true chapter of suffering had just begun. The New York City sun shone fiercely this afternoon, baking the black asphalt outside the main gates of my palace until shimmering heat waves danced in the air. From behind the bulletproof climate-controlled glass walls of my first-floor marble terrace, I sat calmly in my wheelchair. The room was maintained at a cool 68 degrees, a perfect sensory contrast to the earthly hell unfolding for the three outcasts outside. The 10-foot-tall gold-leafed iron gates had just slammed shut with a final echoing clang, locking Adrian, Rosalind, and Chloe out of my territory forever. They were now officially historical trash. I had swept clean from my civilized world. I watched them from 50 feet away, like an aristocrat, watching a low-class street circus. In my hand, a cup of Earl Grey tea steamed with the calming scent of bergamot. The scene outside was a true masterpiece, the result of weeks of my forensic auditing and legal calculations. There was no more European sports car to pick them up. No more housekeeper to open the door respectfully. The three of them stood frozen on the dusty sidewalk, their bodies trembling as they processed the slap of reality that had just struck their arrogant faces. Adrian was the first to break the silence of despair. My narcissistic ex-husband pulled out his personal phone, the only item that escaped seizure because it was his before our marriage, and began making frantic calls, his hand shaking. He tried his business contacts, bank directors, and the elite colleagues he used to treat with my money. From behind the glass, I could read his pleading lips, begging for a quick loan, or at least a ride. But I knew the outcome. News of his termination for cause and his blacklisted credit status had been disseminated by my legal team 10 minutes ago. In this cutthroat corporate world, Adrian was now a financial leper. No sane person would deal with a man being sued for over $15 million. Adrian slammed his phone onto the sidewalk with a frustrated groan, realizing the social connections he once flaunted were just a hollow illusion bought with my fortune. Seeing Adrian's helpless panic, the face of Chloe, the cheap mistress who always flaunted her arrogant smile and luxury, suddenly turned savage. She realized the handsome man she had idolized was nothing more than a poor, debt-ridden empty shell. "Adrian, what the hell is all this?" Chloe's shrill scream pierced the air vents and reached my ears, sounding as sweet as a world-class symphony of victory. "You said this penthouse was yours. You said the loft in Soho was in my name. Why did that cripple's lawyer get to take my Hermes bag? Do something, you loser. My bank account is frozen. I don't have a single dollar to get home." Adrian turned on her with wild eyes. His anger, unable to be directed at me now, targeted his mistress. "Shut your mouth, you whore. This is all your fault. If you hadn't demanded all those expensive things, I wouldn't have been tempted to use company funds. Every luxury item on your body is a toxic asset that is now my personal debt. Alara hacked the system and changed everything. I was framed." The show heated up when Rosalind, who had been weeping over her seized diamond jewelry, suddenly lunged forward. The old woman who had prided herself on false luxury lost all sense of shame. She grabbed Chloe's hair extensions from behind, triggering a pained shriek from the secretary, who tried to fight back. "You damn jinx, you parasite," Rosalind cursed, her voice, horse-beating Chloe's shoulders with her bare, wrinkled hands. "Because you seduced my son, we lost everything. You destroyed our peaceful life. Give me back my credit cards. Give me back my honor, you filthy woman, just a leech on a married man." Chloe didn't take the abuse lying down. She shoved my mother-in-law hard, sending the old woman sprawling onto the hot asphalt. "Get a grip, you old witch. You and your son are the liars. You're the parasites in that house, using that crippled wife's money to act rich. I want no part of this damn debt. We're done, Adrian. Don't you ever dare contact me again." Chloe spat contemptuously near Adrian's expensive leather shoes, then turned and walked quickly away from the gate. She frantically hailed a yellow cab, begging the driver to take her away. She left Adrian frozen, his jaw clenched, enduring an unbearable shame, while Rosalind wailed on the dusty street, mourning her new status as an instant vagrant. They tore each other apart the moment the money supply was cut, proving their loyalty was just a shallow business transaction funded by my past foolishness. I leaned back, feeling a satisfaction as cold as ice flow through every vein. This faded robe no longer felt like an outcast's garment, but the grand robe of an executioner who had successfully completed her task. On the tablet in my lap, I reviewed the final phase of the asset liquidation file. All stock portfolios in my husband's name had been nullified. The auto-debit termination notice had been confirmed by 7 different banks simultaneously. He would never enjoy capital gains from a single penny I had ever entrusted to him. The 2 remaining outside now had no future but brutal poverty that would gnaw at their physical and mental well-being. The next step for the ungrateful mother and son was to find a dilapidated shack in the cheapest corner of the city, a place where they would have to accustom their lungs to the thick stench of sewers all night long. The heaviest punishment for betrayal is not a quick death but being forced to live as a homeless person after tasting the sweetness of the throne. I had used my veto power not just to fire them but to absolutely annihilate their social and economic lives. Justice had been hacked, and this war had been won, without me moving a single inch from my wheelchair. Night fell over the city's slums without mercy. A thunderstorm poured down on the potholed asphalt streets, long forgotten by city planners. In the middle of black muddy puddles, 2 human figures dragged their feet like lost zombies. Adrian Sterling, the man who 24 hours ago proudly held the title of COO, was now nothing more than a shivering, soaked pile of flesh. Every drop of rain that hit his face was a reminder of how foolishly he had traded absolute power for a moment of lust. He used to sit in the back of a climate-controlled luxury sedan. Now he had to drag his feet through the filth of a squalid street. The $5,000 Tom Ford suit on his body was now torn and soaked, absorbing the grimy mud. Behind him, Rosalind whimpered softly. The grand dame who used to flaunt diamond necklaces at socialite luncheons now walked barefoot. Not a single one of her friends would answer her calls. They had cast her out like she had a contagious disease. Her high heels had broken hours ago, leaving her feet blistered and bleeding from the rough asphalt. Her expensive makeup had run, creating black streaks on her wrinkled cheeks. Their lungs, once accustomed to purified air, were now forced to adapt to the thick, pungent, nauseating smell of the sewer. They had officially become vagrants. Since being thrown out of the Marble Palace, Adrian had realized with absolute horror that his ex-wife's threats were not mere psychological bluffs. Adrian's name was permanently engraved on every credit blacklist. Every time he tried to use an ATM or swipe his remaining debit card, the screen displayed a blood-freezing rejection message. The auto-debit system was shut down, and all his banking access was blocked by court order. He didn't have a single dollar in cash to buy a bottle of water. They were parasites ripped from their host tree, left to wither and die on barren ground. Adrian's steps halted in front of a semi-permanent shack made of rotting plywood and a rusty tin roof. A 10x 10-foot hovel for daily rent. There was no gleaming Italian marble floor, only damp, rough concrete. No crystal chandelier, just a single yellow bulb flickering morosely. The landlord, a heavily tattooed man with a menacing face, looked them over with contempt. $50 a day. Pay up front or sleep outside with the rats. Adrian clenched his jaw. His pride was shattered. With a trembling hand, he turned to his mother. Rosalind sobbed, reluctantly removing a pair of 2-gram gold earrings she had managed to hide in her pocket before the security search. The cheap earrings she once scorned her daughter-in-law for were now their only ticket to not sleeping on the wet pavement. Entering the stuffy room, Rosalind immediately collapsed onto the cold concrete floor. Rain began to drip from the leaky tin roof, soaking Adrian's shivering shoulders. The buzz of sewer mosquitoes echoed in their ears like a symphony from hell. This was the price of arrogance. Rosalind wept for her fate, realizing she was no longer a grand dame, but just historical trash living at the bottom of the food chain. Adrian stared blankly at the moldy walls, his mind trapped by the $15.5 million civil lawsuit that would demand every drop of his blood and sweat for the rest of his life. In another part of the city, an equally brutal suffering was tearing apart Chloe. The cheap mistress arrived at her luxury Soho loft panting. She thought she still had one safe haven. But as the elevator doors opened on the 20th floor, she was stopped in her tracks. 3 men in neat suits blocked the door to her apartment. The mahogany door was sealed with yellow police tape and a court seizure notice. Arthur Cromwell's legal team had beaten her to it. "What are you doing to my apartment?" Chloe shrieked, trying to push past, but she was shoved back mercilessly. "This is not your apartment, miss," the team leader said, his tone as cold as ice. Based on the forensic audit, this property was purchased with embezzled corporate funds. It is a toxic asset that must be legally seized to cover the losses of Vance Sterling Properties. From this moment on, you are forbidden from stepping 1 inch inside this property, or we will arrest you for tampering with evidence. Chloe collapsed onto the thick hallway carpet. She frantically pulled out her phone, trying to call her socialite friends or any sugar daddy who could lend her money. The news of Adrian's fall and Chloe's involvement had already spread like wildfire through the city's elite chat groups. None of her calls were answered. Her number was instantly blocked. Not only was eviction awaiting her, but her phone began to ring incessantly with calls from debt collectors ready to hunt her down for her lifestyle's outstanding bills. The woman who once arrogantly insulted a wife for wearing a faded robe was now nothing more than an elite beggar thrown out onto the street. The parasites had finally met their deadly fate. Far from the squalor and screams of despair in a serene and sterile exclusive penthouse, Alara Vance sat with the grace of a tyrant enjoying a warm cup of chamomile tea. Her private therapy room glowed with a soft golden light. She had shed her false identity. She was wrapped in an elegant silk robe, her hair neatly coiffed, a bold red lipstick symbolizing her rebirth. There was no more weak, submissive woman. On the tablet before her was the latest digital report from Arthur Cromwell. Alara read every detail of her enemies suffering from afar, with a faint smile, untouched by pity. Seeing a photo of Adrian huddled in a filthy shack and CCTV footage of Chloe being dragged from the loft, Alara felt a capital gain of emotional revenge, whose value surpassed any material satisfaction. With a single use of her veto power, she had cleanly excised all the malignant tumors that had plagued her life. Her investment portfolio was now 100% clean, sterile from the dirty hands that tried to rob her. The law was not just on her side. The law had become her longsword, severing the necks of the traitors without a trace. Alara swiped the tablet, looking down at her legs, still resting on the wheelchair's support. For the first time in 8 months, she felt a very faint tingling sensation at the tip of her left toe, a tiny sign of a nerve beginning to awaken from its long slumber. She hadn't needed her legs to destroy her enemies, but she would use her legs again to walk upon the ruins of their lives. The world of Adrian, Rosalind, and Chloe was overburied permanently under the mud of absolute poverty. Meanwhile, the world of Alara Vance, the queen with the cold calculation of a machine, was just about to be reborn in absolute glory, untouchable by anyone. Morning in the slums on the outskirts of the city never began with birdsong or golden sunlight. It began with the nauseating stench of evaporating sewage, mixed with the exhaust of rundown cars and the coarse shouts of street vendors. Inside a 10x 10-foot hovel, Adrian Sterling woke up to his own thick, rattling cough. His lungs, once accustomed only to the purified air of a multi-thousand-dollar machine, were now severely inflamed by the dampness of plywood walls covered in toxic black mold. In the corner of the room with its damp concrete floor, Rosalind sat hugging her trembling knees. The former Grand Dame now looked no different from a true street vagrant. Her hair, once perfectly coiffed at an exclusive salon, was now a tangled, matted mess filled with dust and dandruff. Her luxurious clothes, now filthy and stained with gutter mud, had forced her to pick up a faded floral print house dress from a pile of donated secondhand clothing. A cruel and poetic irony. The very garment she had most despised on her disabled daughter-in-law was now the only fabric shielding her frail body from mosquito bites. She had been an arrogant parasite, but now, having lost her lush host tree, she was nothing more than historical trash slowly rotting in a forgotten corner of civilization. A hard knock on the rickety plywood door startled the mother and son. Adrian dragged his limp zombie-like body to the door. When he opened it, 2 men in crisp, dark uniforms stood there. They weren't ordinary street thugs, but legal couriers from Arthur Cromwell's law firm, the cold-blooded executioner who served as Alara's right hand. Mr. Adrian Sterling, one of the men, asked flatly, his eyes scanning the hovel with undisguised disgust at the smell emanating from within. "We're here to serve you with an official copy of the filing from the state court." The man handed over a thick, red-stamped folder. Adrian received it with a violently trembling hand. On the first page, bold letters seemed to physically slap his retinas: civil lawsuit for corporate embezzlement and breach of fiduciary duty. His eyes fell to the line detailing the demanded amount. The figure $15,500,000 was printed with stark clarity, compounded by a late payment penalty clause that would tick up daily like a death clock. The digital document he had so carelessly approved in his wife's luxury penthouse had indeed transferred all the company's toxic assets onto his own fragile shoulders. Now, with his name permanently blacklisted, he couldn't even borrow $100 from a payday loan app. Adrian slid to the concrete floor, dropping the financial death warrant. His ex-wife's liquidation plan had skinned him alive, leaving nothing behind. To simply survive and pay the daily rent on the shack, the narcissistic former COO had no choice but to become a day laborer at the nearest wholesale market. Adrian's body, once polished with million-dollar spa treatments, was now scorched by the street sun. His soft hands were blistered and calloused from heaving 100-pound sacks of rice. The market foreman often cursed him out, demeaning him in front of the other laborers. The once dapper man was now forced to swallow his pride, eating leftover packaged meals just to quiet his cramping stomach. Every time he tried to fight his fate, the shadow of that court filing tightened around his neck. In the cold nights, Rosalind's sanity began to fray. The old woman would often laugh to herself in the corner of the shack, rubbing a small pebble between her fingers, as if it were a pure diamond ring. Delusions of luxury were her only escape from a reality that had shattered her soul. She, who once felt she was at the top of the social pyramid, was now buried alive at the bottom of a dark, endless pit of poverty. On the other side of the city, an equally brutal suffering was tearing apart the last remnants of Chloe's arrogance. The cheap mistress was now hiding in a dingy motel room rented by the hour. Her makeup was a smeared mess, leaving dark circles under her eyes from the unceasing psychological terror. Since being forcibly evicted from her luxury loft, Chloe thought she could survive by selling the few branded items she had managed to save in a small suitcase. She foolishly believed she could still enjoy some capital gain from the dregs of her affair. However, the architect of destruction in the wheelchair never left a single loophole. Based on the high-precision forensic audit, every luxury item Chloe had acquired was tracked by its authentic serial number. When Chloe stepped out of the motel towards a luxury consignment shop, she was immediately blocked by 4 large menacing men. They were debt collectors from the banks whose credit cards had gone into mass default after the auto-debit feature was severed. Miss Chloe Sanders, your platinum card bill is overdue by $300,000, not including penalty interest, said a bald man in sunglasses, snatching the small suitcase from Chloe's hand without warning. Give that back. It's mine, you have no right, Chloe shrieked, trying to reclaim her case. But the strength of a parasite accustomed to an easy life was no match for the rough grip of street collectors. The man opened the case, pulled out 2 designer bags and several jewelry boxes, then laughed condescendingly. Yours. All of this was bought with borrowed money you can't repay. Miss, Elara Vance was kind enough to send us the details of your fraudulent charges. From now on, you will pay what you owe. If not, we know where your family lives back home. That threat froze the blood in Chloe's veins. She collapsed onto the sidewalk, watched by dozens of whispering, judgmental pedestrians. She, who had arrogantly strutted through another woman's marble palace thinking she could leech off her forever, now had to bear a horrifying mountain of debt. Elara's use of her veto power didn't just fire Adrian. Its domino effect scorched the entire parasitic ecosystem around him. Far above all, the suffering crawling like maggots on the city's dirty asphalt in an exclusive penthouse office, Elara Vance sat observing the cityscape. A giant monitor before her displayed a green graph that continued to climb. Her company's portfolio value had skyrocketed following the pest removal from the board of directors. From this godlike perspective, her enemy's suffering was nothing more than a cheap soap opera on a screen. No mercy, no forgiveness. They were now forever trapped in an invisible prison of poverty built by the pure financial genius of a woman in a wheelchair. High above the city's pollution and noise, in an exclusive penthouse that doubled as a world-class private therapy suite, the air was sterile and calming. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panorama of the sleepless metropolis, a concrete carpet where millions of souls fought for power. In the center of the room, dominated by white marble and minimalist furniture, Elara Vance sat with the grace of a queen who had just won the most brutal war of her life. She no longer wore the faded garments that had diminished her dignity. A navy silk robe draped her body, radiating an aristocratic aura, cold, calculating, and utterly untouched by cheap emotion. Under the supervision of a top neurospecialist, flown in from Germany, Elara stared intently at the tips of her feet, resting on a therapy cushion. Silence dominated the room as if time itself was holding its breath to witness a medical miracle. With the concentration of a surgeon's blade, Elara commanded the nerves once pronounced dead to awaken. And then it happened, a subtle twitch, a slow but definite movement in the big toe of her left foot. That physical victory was merely a reflection of the financial one she had already secured. The muscles in her legs might take time to fully recover, but the muscle of her power had crushed her enemies flat. The double mahogany doors opened, silently revealing the figure of Arthur Cromwell. The cold-blooded legal executioner stepped in, carrying a highly encrypted tablet, bringing the final report from the financial battlefield they had designed together. He bowed with deep reverence before placing the digital screen on Elara's lap. That screen was a window into the hell now inhabited by the 3 traitors who had dared to cast out their savior. The final phase of the execution is complete, Miss Vance Arthur reported, his baritone voice breaking the silence. The asset liquidation process to cover the losses of Vance Sterling Properties is 100% finished. Your company's portfolio value has skyrocketed, posting the highest capital gains in 5 years, after the market responded positively to the removal of parasitic figures from the board. Ilara swiped the tablet with an elegant flick of her finger. Her ice-cold eyes absorbed the visualization of suffering on the screen without a ripple of pity. The first report showed the latest portrait of Adrian Sterling. The once dapper man who worshipped arrogance was now nothing more than a living skeleton. Adrian was captured on camera, heaving wet cement sacks at a low-grade construction project. His expensive suits had long been pawned, replaced by a torn t-shirt soaked in filthy sweat. Through the irrefutable forensic audit, the multi-million-dollar civil lawsuit had officially snared Adrian's neck. The narcissist was now a convict, whose name was permanently engraved on every credit blacklist. The national banking system had spit him out like poison. His auto debit was dead, and he had no access to even open the most basic savings account. Adrian was now forever trapped in a dilapidated shack by the railroad tracks, a place where every night his lungs were forced to inhale the thick stench of sewage, replacing the aroma of the luxury colognes he once prided himself on. His arrogance had been broken, leaving a middle-aged man physically shattered and with a dead future. The next page of the report held the dark record of Rosalind. The pious ex-socialite, who once loudly called Ilara a burdensome cripple, was now officially a homeless woman without an identity. Ostracized by her charity league, disowned by her relatives, and abandoned by her own son who was busy fleeing debt collectors, the old woman was stranded on the merciless asphalt streets. Surveillance photos showed Rosalind huddled on the stoop of a closed shop, wrapping her frail body in a faded house dress she had gotten from a donation bin. Her wrinkled hands, once adorned with $100,000 diamonds, were now outstretched, begging for loose change from pedestrians who looked at her with disgust. She, who had once greedily acted like a parasite, constantly feeding on her daughter-in-law's wealth, now had to feel the most brutal slap of karma. There was no more silk-sheeted bed. Her new home was a dusty sidewalk, and she was nothing more than historical trash, slowly rotting in a corner of civilization. The final screen was dedicated to the cheap mistress Chloe Sanders. After all, the luxury items given by Adrian were seized as toxic assets from embezzlement. The young woman's life turned into a never-ending nightmare. Debt collectors from various banks chased her relentlessly, terrorizing every second of her life. Chloe was forced to work as a cleaner in a cheap nightclub, cleaning up vomit from drunk patrons until the early hours, just to pay the interest on her ever-swelling debt. Her artificial beauty faded quickly, replaced by a haggard face filled with stress and absolute fear. She, who had dreamed of sitting on the throne of a marble palace, was now swept away by the wave of destruction she herself had provoked. The 3 parasites had received their justice, an earthly hell designed with mathematical precision and executed without a single tear. Ilara placed the tablet on the glass table, leaning her body back into the wheelchair's cushion with a long, relieved breath. A smile of pure satisfaction, free from all vengeance and anger, slowly spread across her red-painted lips. She had used her absolute veto power not just to punish, but to restore the balance of the universe. Her justice was cold, systematic, and lethal. But in the end, it was a justice that cleansed her soul of the remnants of betrayal. Let them live alongside their suffering, Arthur. Never stop the surveillance and ensure every legal bill is sent to their hovel every month, Ilara commanded, with the finality of an aristocrat. They must keep breathing, if only so they can remember every day of their lives that going against their life's architect was the most fatal mistake they ever made. Your command is absolute law, ma'am, Arthur replied, excusing himself to let the Queen enjoy her solitude at the peak of her triumph. Ilara Vance turned her wheelchair to face the giant glass window, gazing at the sea of city lights twinkling beneath her. Outside, the night wind blew, carrying away the last vestiges of the bitter memories that had once imprisoned her. She might have lost the full function of her legs due to a past sacrifice, but she had found the limitless wings of her power. No more tears, no more illusions of cheap love. Ilara's life was now on a completely new path built on a foundation of absolute independence, and the ruins of the enemies she had demolished with her own 2 hands. The chapter of revenge was permanently closed, leaving the true executioner sitting unshakably at the top of her tower, holding complete control over her destiny and her universe.